Dreamcatchers, welcome to the Writers Haven and welcome to our new set. I'm very excited about our second season. I'm your host, Helena, and today we're having a discussion with Dr. Patsy Blackshear, president of the Alex Haley Kunta Kinte Foundation located in Annapolis, Maryland. The foundation has produced a number of productions to promote and preserve the legacy of author and screenwriter Alex Haley. Many of you may remember him as the author of Roots, a book that sold over 4 million copies, was translated into 37 languages, was optioned into an ABC miniseries that reached a record-breaking viewing audience of 130 million viewers. That's major. He also won a Pulitzer Prize, a Peabody, and several Emmy Awards. Have I grabbed your attention? Well, today we're going to discuss the work of the foundation and their latest documentary, The Bates Center of Excellence. Join me now in welcoming Dr. Patsy Blackshear to the Haven. You know, first and foremost, some people may not actually know that in addition to being a genealogist and an author, he was also a screenwriter.
Yes, yes.
And so because the majority of our viewing audience are aspiring writers and filmmakers, I really want to capture that part of who he was and his legacy.
Yeah.
So can we start by just talking about Alex Haley, the man?
Well, Alex Haley, the man, actually is from this area. Mm-hmm. He has family, actually, in the Annapolis area. And he would come to Annapolis quite often and visit family, and he would do research based upon stories that he had heard from some of his older relatives. And from that research, primarily at Maryland Archives, he was able to create his book, Roots. But you're right. He's a writer. He was a writer, and he was a merchant marine, and so he would oftentimes go on those merchant marine ships on some of their tours, and he would use that as a way to have quiet time to write. Now, I was first introduced to Alex after he had written an excerpt of Roots in Reader's Digest. He would write for Reader's Digest. Right. He would write for Playgirl magazine and Playboy magazine. Mm-hmm. And so I read an article in Reader's Digest that he had written, and one of the researchers from the Maryland Archive actually had him in to talk about that work. And I went to a reception, and that was my first time meeting him. So it was really before the book Roots was published, but he had some working elements of that book written earlier.
Okay, and how is the foundation's mission, current mission, in keeping with his legacy? What are some of the things that the foundation is doing?
Well, Alex knew members of our organizing board. And as such, my husband, in fact, Leonard Blackshear, and as such, Alex would come to Annapolis and he would help with the Kunta Kinte Festival, which the Kunta Kinte High Heritage group would run. And so Alex would come to that, and as a part of that, they had discussions about going beyond. And so the Beyond effort became creating a memorial to Alex, his legacy being a focus on the universal story that's embraced by everyone when they look at their heritage and they look at their legacy. And that's what Roots was about. So our mission is to promote that universal concept through a lot of focus on cultural activities, educational activities, genealogy activities around the contributions that African Americans have made to the Annapolis area. And so we do a lot of things related to heritage and legacy promoting and preservation.
And for those who are watching but do not really know the history of Annapolis and why that became the location, the landmark for those efforts and ensuring that cultural activities and the other things that the foundation does as part of their mission, was seeded and founded in that area. What's some of the history and why?
Well, first of all, Alex's ancestor, Kunta Kinte, arrived on the shores, on the docks of Annapolis, and was sold there into slavery. And that was the research that he did, his genealogy research on his family. And Kunta Kinte is the only named slave that we're aware of who came to these shores. And so it becomes a place of homage, a place of honoring the contribution that slaves and other indentured people made in coming to this United States. And that's why it's so important.
Okay, and so what are some of the projects that the foundation, I mean, aside from, you alluded to a few of them just now with the memorial and things of that nature, but what are some of the other projects that the foundation has produced? Well,
because we try to preserve and promote the heritage and experience of African Americans in the Anne Arundel County area, we have had genealogy conferences where grandparents with their grandchildren can spend time together learning their family history and creating a genealogy record. We conduct something called Community History Days, where we go into certain African American neighborhoods and we archive that neighborhood from the perspective of hard copy records and pictures and oral interviews from people who know the history of it, so that it is available not only now but in the future, and it's maintained in libraries. We've had root camps. Root camps are where youngsters have actually participated in a one-week experience of developing their own genealogy, family genealogy, and they work with their elders to do that. At the end of that 1 week, they actually have that genealogy. We've gone into the oldest African American church in Annapolis, Asbury United Methodist Church, and captured the history of that church by interviewing those elders ages 90 and older to, again, develop the archive of that record so that it is available. So what we're doing now with a documentary about Bates High School, the historic Bates High School, is just a continuation of that effort.
Okay, great, and that's a great segue into my next set of questions that are more specific to the documentary that I wanted to talk to you about. Before we get to that, there were some other small snippets of production that you all did that was in keeping with promoting the memorials there. Do you want to mention those?
That's
really
true.
quick?
I mean, it's really very significant. When you look at memorials, they're kind of like bricks and mortar. They are granite and marble and stone that's there. But what we tried to do was to help our memorial tell the story about itself by creating virtual tour guides. And these virtual tour guides allowed us to create videos of the three components of the memorial, because the memorial has a story wall, it has something called a compass rose, and it has the statue grouping. And most people in the state of Maryland and people in the area who go to Annapolis, they know the statue grouping, but it's much larger. So with the virtual tour guide, an individual can either go to our website and they can get the story about each of those components, or they can scan the memorial using a QR code scanner while they are physically there and get the story. So we produce those videos and then made those available for people to use.
Okay, and was that the beginning of then creating a documentary to further focus on the history and the rich culture of the people of Annapolis, Maryland, and Anne Arundel County?
Yes, in some ways you're correct. As I said before, we do community history days where we go in and we interview the elders within a community, and we archive that information, and they are video interviews. The difference is that the virtual tour guide is actually a video story, and that video story about the various components of the memorial. So it was our first effort to create a film, if you will, or brief documentary. And so the Bates memories, the stories about the memories of the Bates teachers, is a more extensive effort.
Okay, and one last question or comment. So Chris Haley was the person, he's the grandson of?
He is the nephew of Alex Haley.
Okay.
And Chris has been a board member of the foundation, and he's now an advisory committee member. And he is not only a archivist, but also he is a actor. And so Chris was our actor for the virtual tour guide that we created. And it's really quite unique to have the grandson, the nephew of Alex telling the story about Alex, the memorial, the story wall. So it's a very nice presentation.
Yeah, it's very, very well done. Okay, so let's talk more about the Bates documentary, and why was it important to the foundation to produce it?
Well, it's important because, again, we try to preserve and promote the history of African Americans and their experience in Anne Arundel County. Bates was the only African American high school that served students, African Americans receiving secondary education in the county prior to the integration of the school system. It was a huge high school. The secondary program started for African Americans, I think, around 1917 at the Stanton Center, which still exists in Annapolis. It's a small facility, but then because that center was so crowded and the need was so great, Bates was born out of that effort. And so Bates was created or built in 1930s, I think 1933, and when it was first built, the students attending were primarily from the Annapolis and Parole area. There was no transportation. And so the bus services were provided to transport students in the late 1930s, and when that happened, the enrollment just exploded. Probably 75 to 85% of the students who attended Bates were transported into Annapolis. The rest of the students, of course, walked, and they came from Annapolis. That made it an extremely large school, and it made it a historically significant school for the county because it was the only one prior to the integration of schools.
And so, you know, for the dream catchers who are watching, the reason why having Dr. Blackshear here to talk about the making of this film is because it's actually a foundation that produced this documentary, which is kind of unusual, so to speak. In many cases, as we talked before, you know, whether it's a foundation or it's a museum or some other entity, they will hire people in that industry to do it. But in this case, you were able to get a lot of help from volunteers to put together a very, very informative, very well done documentary. So could you talk to us a little bit about that experience?
The foundation is lucky enough to have volunteers and colleagues who are experienced in a number of areas. For the virtual tour guide that we did first, the person who did our primary writer was a genealogist and a researcher. So she could do the writing of the script. The narration was done by Chris Haley. Again, he's an archivist and he is also an actor, and he has produced film. So that gives us a lot of expertise.
But was he on a Bates film, or?
He was on the virtual tour guide. He was a narrator there. On the Bates film, he is our technical advisor, given his experience with films and working in that industry. He is our technical advisor. We have a narrator who has experience in the field, Carol Henson. In fact, a lot of people probably know him as Mr. C.
Right.
So that gives us additional talent.
Well, with the time tunnel.
Yes.
The WHUR.
That's right. That's right. And so he is our narrator, so that gives us that expertise. We have a wonderful videographer and editor who has worked with the foundation on a number of programs, Anthony Spoot Production, and so that gives us that talent. And so we then have our genealogist for the foundation, along with board members, one of whom, Vivian Spencer, who works on production, so she has that expertise. So it's taking the expertise of volunteers who love and support and work with the foundation, bringing it together so that we could create, develop, and produce the documentary.
And what were some of the challenges, would you say, that you came across in producing it?
It became our life.
Okay.
Well, I think the first thing is we started a little backwards because our original intent was to capture the history of Bates from the perspective of those teachers that are still with us who taught there during the period of desegregated schools. And there were 15 that we were able to interview.
Nice. That's a nice
One
number.
came in from North Carolina. The others were all in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. So there were 15 teachers that we interviewed, ages 80s and 90s. And we wanted to interview them so that we would have the record of their experiences as teachers at Bates during that period of segregated schools for our archives. For their records, they will get a copy of that. But for our archives, because we maintain a genealogy resource center, so where people come in and do genealogy research. So we started there, but then we also decided that we should take it and share the story broader, not just provide a copy of those videos to the teachers and for our resource center, but use the footage from those interviews to create the documentary and share it with the community. So we worked with the Bates Legacy Center, and they provided partnership support to help us with this effort in identifying the teachers and allowing us to get footage that from a lot of their records, their yearbooks, that would be used in the documentary. So,
any challenges in getting those images?
Yes, we had a lot of yearbooks we had to go through, a lot of archive records we had to go through at Banneker Douglas, at the Maryland Archives, from photographers who have experience in providing photography support in the area, and just trying to get it. And then in some ways the quality of the documents, because these are old records, and trying to digitize them. So all of that came to bear in trying to do this.
Was funding ever a challenge?
Because we work with volunteers and we work with the expertise of the board and volunteers that help us, funding is on a shoestring. We use the resources of the foundation to help support this with small grants that we get to help carry out our work, and then with support from an organization called the Four Rivers Heritage Area. They gave us a small mini grant. So that individual contributions, the foundation resources, is how we kind of by bootstrap brought it together.
And how long did it take to basically not only come up with the idea, but then to script it out and to actually start filming and then and getting to completion? Again, as I said, we kind of started a little backwards, and so we had to catch up with ourselves. We did our interviews first, and we did our interviews in the spring and summer of 2017. And then we had to go through our footage and spend quite a bit of time looking at the footage to see what the coherent thought is. And then we had to script from there, as opposed to scripting first
and then going. So we had to script from the thoughts that were presented by the teachers as we interviewed them to be able to tell the story.
Okay. And where can people go to get more information about the documentary and to find out where it's being exhibited?
They can go two places. One, they can go to Eventbrite and just search for Bates Teachers, and that will allow individuals to see the various schedules that we have established so they can register for attendance, or they can go to our website, the foundation's website, and there's a brief article there that talks about it, and again, it will direct them as to how to get registered.
Okay. And are there any projects in the horizon?
We're always looking at projects in the horizon. We have a number of requests to archive various communities, so we have that on the table. We have requests to hold another genealogy conference for grandparents and their children. That is being examined as an effort that we want to do in the near future. And then finally, some of us want to do another Roots Camp. So we always have a stable of programs and activities that are designed to, again, share the experience and promote the culture of African Americans in the community.
Okay, okay. So for the film, you have some dates coming up.
Yeah, we do. We have a number of dates established, and when you go to register, you will see those options. And we chose multiple dates because we wanted to give people a variety of options to choose from, so that we could make sure that we had given people the chance. They are all in February. And they're the weekend of...
Oh, Black History Month.
Yes, yes, yes. They're the weekend of February 17th. That's Saturday and Sunday, and the next weekend as well.
Okay, and it's all free?
All free.
To the public?
All free.
Excellent, excellent.
We maintain a genealogy resource library that's open for genealogy research that's free as well. And we try to make our resources available free.
Okay, it's a wonderful service that the foundation is offering to the community, and you know, whether it's the Anne Arundel community or beyond, because genealogy is so important. Tell us about some of the components of the film, the Bates film.
The whole story of the film was extremely fascinating because, you know, listening to the teachers as they told their story of their experiences is like we were on the edge of our seats. When we look at who taught at Bates, we found that there were students who had grown up in the community, they had gone to Bates, and they came back. They have an interesting story. In fact, one of those teachers talked about how when she was a student, how her brother missed the bus one day. Keep in mind, I said, that 75 to 85% of the students travel by buses. So there was a lot of buses out front, she said. And so her brother missed the bus, and he lived in South County. Now, South County is Lothan, Deal, Friendship, down in that area.
Not close.
Not close. And they did not have cars. A large number of families did not have cars. And so she talked about how he started walking home. The only way he could walk home was to follow the route of the bus. So that was not the most expeditious route, because that's all he knew. And he made it to the old South River Bridge, if you know anything about the Annapolis area, Route 2 going towards Solomon Island.
That's a pretty long bridge.
That's a pretty long bridge. He did not cross that bridge. He stopped there. He was scared to cross that bridge. And his parents had gotten a neighbor who had a car to help them come look for him, and they found him there at the edge of the bridge. So she talks about that. One of the teachers talk about their experiences as a student and how chewing gum was an infraction and how they didn't want to get caught chewing gum. Think about that. We have one of the teachers who talked about how they would take the students to Baltimore to play games, because they had to play other African-American schools. And those were schools from other counties, or those were schools in D.C. or schools in Baltimore. And how in taking the youngsters to Baltimore once, for the first time, those kids would just be looking everywhere because it was just a sight to behold for them. The youngsters had not been out of Annapolis, and so the teachers have exposed them to a lot of things. The teachers would work with parents, and the parents was a part of the village of helping to educate the youngsters. The teachers would talk about how failure was not an option for the youngsters. They went over and above. The other thing that was interesting in the story that we try to tell is that the school was the social hub for Annapolis. I mean, everybody looked at what was happening at the school, and they tried to participate in that. It was a social hub, and it was big doings, if you will, for the Annapolis area. That, and then the fact that the teachers talk about their dress. They came to school in heels with purses and gloves, and I said to one of them, and a hat too, and she said, no, we did not wear hats, but they came dressed because they felt that they set the example for the youngsters. And we talked to one student who said to us he can remember lessons to this day that the teachers gave him and helped him to learn when he was a student, and that they really made a difference in his life, and that he has 3 girls, and he has promoted a style for his young girls that is reminiscent of the style that those teachers had. He said because they always looked nice, they looked neat, they carried themselves in a certain way, and that's what he wanted his daughters to do. So they did that.
I don't think we appreciate our teachers enough.
No.
Because our children spend so much time with them, and to have a school that was all about excellence and wanting the best for their students, and not only in school but after school and in life. And so I think that documentary is very important, and I really do hope that people will definitely go out and catch the viewing of it. So dream catchers, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Haven. Perhaps it encouraged you to go out and learn more about your ancestry, as the story of Roots has inspired countless others to do. Or maybe you learned something about the Bates School in Annapolis and want to check out the Bates Center of Excellence documentary. In either case, go to the Kunta Kinte-Alex Haley Foundation website at www.kintehaley.org. That's KINTEHALEY. Did I spell that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, .org, to learn more about how you can do both. If you missed our Season 2 opener with Connie Briscoe, or any of our Season 1 shows, catch us on our YouTube channel at The Writers Haven Show with V. Helena, and become a subscriber so you'll never miss a show. Next week, tune in for a discussion with poet and lyricist Hermond Palmer, who will discuss his writer's journey as a poet and songwriter. I'll see you next time in The Haven, and until then, catch fire on purpose.
Oh yeah, yes! So much fun! Mwah.